right, here we go. Matt Davis, Kingmaker Project. Hello, welcome to this video. Today I'm going to talk a bit about the masculine archetypes: king, warrior, magician, and lover. That's king, warrior, magician, and lover. Lover often gets overlooked, but really it's the most important. We're going to talk about all four so that you can see how these four archetypes being kind of like puzzle pieces of the psyche that fit together and interact with each other. I'll talk more about that in a second. But how these four archetypes, they appear in all good legends, myths, stories, plays. The drama that interests us will often have these archetypal themes playing through them. And by understanding them and kind of looking at the qualities that they have and which ones are good and which ones are more to be avoided, you can sort of see how to get a positive outcome for yourself in all kinds of different situations by using the archetypes, like a mental shortcut. Okay, so we'll start with the king. And the cool thing about the king is that he is like... Well, the king is in context with the warrior, the magician, and the lover, right? So the king is, he has the ability to be a warrior, but he actually commands the warrior, right? So the king, what the king does is he decrees. He uses wisdom and authority, and he makes decisions. So as the king, your main function is to make decisions, have long-reaching kind of purpose, destiny type thinking as the king. Where am I going? Where's the kingdom going over the next 100 years, over the next 50 years, over the next week? And how do I balance all of these things? And then what kind of commands and blessings do I give, right? So it's not the king's job to figure out how to do it exactly. That's more for the warrior and the magician to work together to figure out. So the king looks at what is best and makes these decisions and then commands the warrior, right? So I said decisions, I said blessings and commands, right? So what is a blessing? Well, the king's blessing is basically when the king says, that's good, more of that, right? So there's kind of two obvious ways to get people to do what you want. One is to tell them to stop doing what you don't want. Right, and that one's very popular. You know, hey, don't do that. Blah, 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 right? We hear that a lot from everybody. From my mom, definitely thought that was a good one to use when I was a child, right? But the blessing, and this archetype can apply to men and women too. You call it the sovereign, right? The king is clearly a masculine archetype, but the queen, the king and queen, the sovereign, right? So the sovereign can bless, right? A blessing would be like, that's great. I like what you're doing there. Good job. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Right? That's a really effective way to get things to be the way that you want them to be, is look for things that are already very close to the way you like them and bless them. Like, that's great. Right? Try that for a week, where you don't criticize, you just bless. And you might find it to be like, it's a pretty effective way to do things. It's a little bit of a mindset shift for a lot of people. It's kind of like a gratitude practice, but that's one of the main ways that the king gets what he wants done, is he blesses the warrior for good behavior, and he commands the warrior, right? So another concept that the king operates within is the domain. So knowing what is your domain and what isn't your domain. The king is very aware of what's in his domain. So what's in your domain? Well, are the people in your domain, like your friends, your family, your roommate, whoever it is, are they in your domain? Well, not exactly. With this kind of thinking, you have to realize that the people are not in your domain, but your relationship to those people is in your domain. They have a relationship to you, and you have a relationship to them, and their relationship to you is in their domain, and your relationship with them is in your domain. So you can cultivate and accept responsibility for the relationship, but the people themselves are not in your domain, unless you're swaying into the shadow pole of the king, which is the tyrant, where you are attempting to dominate people into your domain. They will naturally rebel against that. Many king myths where the people are being oppressed is, kind of subtly pointing at the fact that the king doesn't get that the people are not his, that only his relationship to them is his responsibility, right? So he goes a little too far. So, the king. So that's part one. Let's talk about the warrior. What does the warrior do? So the warrior is where the action happens, right? He listens to what the king wants. He's like thinking about the long-term goal the king is, and he says, what do I need to do, king? And the king often says, I don't know, make it happen. And the warrior gets to decide, right? He's the decider. That last part of the word decide, side, suicide, homicide, genocide. Decide means to cut off all the other possibilities, to kill possibilities and pick one, right? A lot of times people will have resistance to making a difficult decision because there's kind of a death in it. You decide one thing and you killed off all the other options, right? So the warrior's the killer. He decides how exactly. The king's a killer too, right? He's like saying, do this and make this future happen. The warrior is the one that goes and actually swings the sword. So it's like the story, it's 3 frogs sitting on a log, and one of them decides to jump in the water. Well, how many frogs are sitting on the log now? And you might say 2, because one decided to jump in the water. No, there are 3, because just deciding to jump in the water does not actually mean to jump in the water, right? So in this metaphor, the king would decide to jump in the water. The warrior would jump in the water, right? The warrior is courageous. He is disciplined. One of the things that the warrior can do is train his reflex. So in a sword fight, or training to be in a sword fight, this is kind of easy to imagine, where he's holding the sword and he fights and or hits a training dummy or something, and the master, the trainer, helps him see the inefficiencies in his strikes, and he's like, do it like this or do it like that, or he duels and makes subtle little micro adjustments until eventually his perfect technique is reflex, right? At first it won't be reflex, it'll be wobbly and all this, and then eventually it will be, where just instantaneously, without thought, without really having to try or think about all the nuance, reflex just happens, right? So you go from chaos and who knows what you're doing, wild swings, to perfection actually being a reflex. So how can you apply this in your own life? Well, let's say that you're trying to get good at something, like playing the piano or getting out of bed when the alarm goes off, right? This is a good metaphor for habit building. So let's say you want to get out of bed when the alarm goes off, right? Well, one day the alarm goes off and you lay in bed for 20 minutes. And then you're like, oh, I should have got up. And then you get up, right? Well, the warrior looks at that and says, okay, our technique, our form is a little off, right? Like ideally, we're laying in bed, the alarm goes off, and then we get up, right? And we go drink a glass of water or something. So the warrior will be the one who kind of thinks through, what do we need to do? Oh, I need to pour myself a glass of water the night before, puts it out. It's actually a little bit of a magician trick. We'll get to him in a bit. Put the glass of water out, and then when the alarm goes off, the warrior says, oh, the alarm has gone off, I'll drink some water. So he sits up and drinks the water, and then now that I'm sitting up, my feet go on the floor, right? So he has these 2 actions. And now his feet are on the floor, and then he stands up, right? So the warrior decides that that's what's going to happen in the morning. The king has already decided, you need to get your ass up earlier, right? Because we got things to do, right? So the king makes the decree. Now it's up to the warrior to figure it out. He recruits the magician to get kind of clever about the glass of water, things like that, right? Now the alarm goes off, and you lay in bed for 5 minutes, and then you're like, oh yeah, I got a glass of water. I'll drink the water. You drink the water. Oh yeah, feet on the floor. Here we go. Okay, cool. Well, now you're a little closer, right? After a few times repeating this, eventually it's just going to be reflex. The alarm goes off, you drink the water, your feet are on the floor, you get up. The warrior then improves his technique and efficiency so that he is doing the thing that the king wants by reflex. It's not a lot of willpower, it's not a lot of struggle. He's just using repetition to get it into his neurons, right, into his nervous system, so that if something, if he gets jumped, this happens, right? Like, it's repeatable. So that's a little bit about the warrior. He's got some other cool things, like your relationship to death is in the warrior's domain. He's the one that understands that death is a reality, and that there's an urgency to our actions and decisions, and that laying around and wasting time, that's it's not the warrior's game. The magician, where you might see a little bit more of that trickstery, why don't we just waste our time? It doesn't matter, right? Because the magician has all kinds of crazy things going on. The magician, his main function is to know things, right? Like Tyrion. Tyrion in Game of Thrones is a magician archetype. He's not literally like making fire, like blowing things up or reading spell books, but he's the magician archetype because his main job is to know things. Well, to drink and to know things. I'm not sure what archetype drinking is. Maybe the lover. We'll get to him. But the magician is the knower. The magician can figure out cool tricks of how to do things, right? He's like, the warrior's like, let's get out of bed. And the magician is like, oh, well, I read that drinking water in the morning can revivify the whatever systems, right? He's got this like knowledge. And so he like informs the warrior of this. And the warrior's like, great, thank you, magician, puts it out there. That's a magician trick. Alchemy is the magician. So doing deep inner work, like finding these like shadowy parts of ourselves that we don't really approve of or that are kind of messing with us. And, like I have a pretty powerful hedonist, kind of slothful being in me that wants to just waste time and eat candy and lay around and just be like, I deserve it, right? Like that part of me actually has a lot of really great things to offer. About enjoying life and taking it slow and slowing down and being in the moment and not always feeling that urgency to be doing something productive, right? The magician's role to alchemize that is to, one, like notice all of those good things and then help that part be kind of integrated into the whole where it's not sabotaging me, right? So that inner alchemy, that deep inner work, in some models, there's a Native American model that talks about the direction of the magician is the south, I think, and the color is black, and the idea in the like the winter where you're like this going into the darkness and discovering lost secrets, the bear that hibernates and comes back out renewed, right? So the magician has this kind of darkness, this hermit that will retreat and do things and then come out prepared and powerful, right? That's the magician. He's a master of transformation. This is also where mentorship happens. Like if you've ever seen Fantasia, where Mickey Mouse is the sorcerer's apprentice and he's apparently being trained to be a sorcerer by his mentor, the magician, and the mentor leaves and says, whatever you do, don't do what you do. Like, whatever you do, don't animate that broom. Or he says, like, you carry all these buckets of water, right? And so Mickey's supposed to be hauling these buckets to learn some lesson that's like beyond him and kind of a pain in the butt, and he doesn't really want to do it. And then when the master leaves, the trickster comes out and he animates the broom to do it, but then it gets out of control, right? So that story, I mentioned legends and myths, right? That story actually has a lot of wisdom in it. So what's it showing you? Well, there's a mentor-mentee relationship between Mickey and the master. So kind of showing that there's a wisdom in seeking that out, right? Like how lucky to be the sorcerer's apprentice, right? He's going to learn all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah, it's kind of pain at times, right? Like you don't want to haul the water, that sucks, but you're also going to get like untold magical powers eventually if you listen. So that's pretty cool. So one piece of wisdom in there is seek out mentorship, find the master, ask him to teach you things, right? Be ready for his lessons. He also listen to the master's lessons, right? Because the master's trying to teach him something by like haul the damn water yourself. But Mickey knows his little magic trick and makes the broom. The broom hauls the water, but then the broom won't stop, and so Mickey tries to command him, but he won't listen. So now this like raw power is out of his control. He chops the broom with an axe, and then all of the little pieces of broom animate, and they all start hauling water, and now it's even more out of control. So what are we learning there? Well, magic is to be respected. So do we have actual magic in the world? Like, can I animate a broom? I mean, you could make a case that robotics is kind of like that, right? Nanobots and like all kinds of technology, biological technology, that's our magic, right? That's what the metaphor, the myth is talking about. So what would be a modern day real example of things like that going out of control? Well, things that, like the first thing that comes to mind is something like Monsanto, right? This company where they're using magic, right? Like DNA, genome sequencing to make some cool things happen, but it's getting out of control. Like there's all of these awful side effects. The petroleum, right? Like how freaking cool that we found this substance in the earth that we can burn and fuel how many millions of cars all across the planet. That's amazing. But what's happening? It's getting out of our control, right? It's burning up into the air, right? And I don't even have to really understand or have an opinion about climate science to realize that putting pollutants into the air is not a good idea, right? And eventually that will, come back to bite us. So how does that help, right? So like, do you see how just with the idea of the magician, like I was able to kind of tap into all of these lessons, and there's more, right? Like I'm just kind of scratching the surface here, tip of the iceberg sort of thing. So it can simplify your thinking, right? So now we've got a king, we've got a warrior, we've got a magician. If I want to make a decision, I can take the king and kind of ask the magician about the truth. Like, hey, let's do some research, right? So the magician advises the king, right? So I get clear, and then I'm clear on what the relationship is there. Like, oh, I'm using my magician to get some information to help my king make a good decision. When the king is satisfied, then he looks at all of the variables and makes a decision, right? The frog decides to jump off the log. Well, now the warrior is engaged, and the warrior actually takes action and starts doing what it takes to get the kingdom in order, right? He's commanding the troops, getting things done. So the king, the warrior, and the magician make a really great team. They work well together. The magician is a huge asset. The thing with modern men, like these days, myself included, is the magician is kind of running the show a lot of times. So, and you see this show up in movies too, where there will be like the magician kind of whispering in the king's ear, and the king just like makes the decision that the magician wants. But the king is not really like accessing his virtue. He's not really thinking about the kingdom, right? The magician is usually obsessed with power and more knowledge and things like that, right? So the king is kind of being run by the magician. So many men today in 2020 are being run by their magician and thinking that they're a king when it's really the magician. They're just interested in gaining more power. They're just interested in, saving work, right? They're animating the brooms and being like, haha, look how amazing I am, right? And the magician is powerful and amazing, incredible, untold ability in the magician archetype. And all men have it, right? You've got a magician in you, right? These are primal archetypes. But what happens when the magician runs the show? Things get out of control. Things get out of hand. It's better to have the king making the decisions based on principles, on virtue, and access the magician to do whatever you want to do, but direct it intelligently through the heart, through the body, as the king. And how does the king make a good decision? Well, that's part where the lever comes in, right? Because the lever, a lot of men will just have the lever off to the side and ignore him. But with a lot of men, it's the other way around, where the lever's running the show and the warrior has no place, right? So you often see this dichotomy between overrepresented lover and overrepresented warrior. And you can probably already think of men that are one or the other, right? Where like one is just like a little too hard, a little too gung-ho, maybe likes to get in fights, and or is a workaholic, or is kind of an asshole, like just warrior. Or maybe a little cold and numb, like soldiers who've had extreme trauma will go into their warrior like, I don't want to feel anything, right? So their lover is far away. And then there's also men who, I don't know, they seem maybe a little soft. You don't necessarily trust them with a gun, or if maybe you give it to them, but you're sure that they'll take it apart and throw it away or something, right? Or if it's time to make a hard decision to take action, they're kind of probably going to be like, well, what do you think? What do you think? Let's all work together, like they don't have a strong warrior. I see this in kind of the new age hippie, for lack of a better word. I lived in Austin, so there were a lot of dudes like this walking around, and kind of wearing the hemp pants and smoking weed every day, and got the long hair, and he's kind of like, oh man, like, isn't it just so great how we can go down to the river every day and work at Jamba Juice and make smoothies, and what a great life, like where's the mission? Where's the purpose? Where's the drive? Like, where's the community? Like, what are you building? Where's your legacy, right? Like, those are questions the king asks and engages the warrior, right? So these two things, the warrior and the lover, we have a huge split right now. You'll kind of see it in politics too, like the conservatives are a little bit more warrior and the liberals are a little bit more lover. Well, the truth is, those things, they need to work together, right? Because what is the lover's role? The lover's the one that's accessing the heart. He's feeling compassion, right? He's feeling love. He's feeling the oneness of all of this. The king, the magician, and the warrior, they could take over the world, right? They've got everything that they need. With the lover mixed in, now the man is actually informed on a more grounded body level, right? The sensuality, right? And the women if you've got your archetypes in balance, women love it, right? They're just like, oh, finally, right? And so, but they'll often be kind of like going after men who have more warrior or more lover, like wishing that they were the other way, and then like trying to find this balance. And often we'll miss the men that are balanced, or they just kind of like don't get noticed. Or they're so rare, maybe, that they just kind of don't, they're not asserting themselves quite as strongly as somebody with like an overrepresented warrior, like the just the asshole, the lovers in the back of the scene. Yeah, I don't know, like a good balance. You just sort of, that guy's just getting what he wants invisibly. He's not out there jostling with the other men. To be noticed, right? So the women will sense your balance in these different ways, and if you're lacking in one, they're gonna try to help you access the other one way or another. Might be by, if you're all lover, they might just like ignore you or be kind of mean to you or take advantage of you to see if that warrior will activate, to be like, hey, screw you, this is the way things are. Like, oh, you've got a spine? Okay, then, women will kind of activate that kind of thing. Or if you're a warrior, overrepresented warrior, then they'll all be trying to soften you, like, oh, like, come, like, be with me, like, slow down, they're trying to tame you or something like that, right? They're trying to bring out your lover. So balance super important. So the king and the lover have an interesting relationship because the king needs the lover to make good decisions. He needs to feel the oneness, the connectedness in his realm to make a good decision. So me personally, I started out way overrepresented in the warrior. Right? I was protecting myself from my feelings because I had a chaotic childhood, and I just kind of cordoned off the lover and was like, look, dude, you're weak. Every time the lover speaks, we get messed up somehow, right? So like, no lover, right? The lover went in the prison or something. Like, and I had to like let the lover out. Right? I had to unlock him and kind of let his voice shine. Right now, while I'm speaking, there's feeling in my voice, right? That's the lover. If I were all warrior, I would sound a little like kind of just autistic or something, like da, 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 or I'd be yelling at you like, you gotta do this way, y'all, and blah blah blah, right? Like, or I wouldn't even make it to here where I managed to feel comfortable expressing myself, right? Like, so right now my lover and warrior are in pretty good balance, but I have to like work on that relationship. So the lover is kind of telling the king what's important. So right now I'm speaking to you because this is important, right? I want other men to understand this so that so that y'all can feel what I'm feeling. So that it's kind of like I'm talking to the younger version of me. When I was 30 years old, what do I wish somebody had told me? I would love a model like this, right? Like my logical brain, my magician loves stuff like this. So as a lover, I feel compassion for other men who maybe will thrive in a model like this, right? So I tell my king, like, hey, this is important work. I want to share this, right? I feel sentimental about it. There's meaning in it, right? The king listens to that. Getting all of my gear set up, the microphone and everything, that was magician, right? The warrior was making it happen, but the magician was figuring out, well, how do I do my microphone interface? And how do I get multiple screens on my computer? How do I record this? How do I put a compressor on my voice, right? That's magician. The lever is just kind of there energizing things, like making it happen. One thing I'll say is that the king, the warrior, and the magician set the stage, and then the lover takes the stage, right? So like all of this, like all of the things, all your endeavors are only worthwhile if you've got a lover to come up and express through them, right? So lover's super essential, and these four archetypes, they're present in you, and there are other archetypes. I'll just mention one, the wild man, who gets confused for the warrior sometimes, but the wild man is super interesting, right? Just like this kind of primal beast inside of you that cannot be contained. The trickster is often held as a separate archetype. There are models where the magician includes the trickster because there's shadows under all of these. So with the magician, for instance, the detached manipulator is one shadow pole, and then the know-it-all trickster is another shadow pole. So a lot of times, I'll go into it just quickly, like the magician. Like I know a lot of men who like they think they're so smart, they're just a know-it-all, and they're kind of effing with you, right? They're kind of messing with you because they know things, like subtly teasing you, like using language to spin little traps, or like joking at your expense, because they're that know-it-all trickster, right? And there's a challenge in it. The trickster. How do you handle the trickster's challenge, right? So the trickster is part of the magician in a lot of models, but it can also be considered a separate archetype. Like the jester or the fool will often come out to kind of challenge the king. I don't know how many times I've been vibing, like really felt like I have my king energy down, and then there will be like some dude that's just like a complete jackass. He's the jester, right? He's the trickster, and he comes out to kind of mess with me, right? And part of his role is to remind me that I'm human and that I'm mortal and that there's kind of humor in the world. And to not take it so seriously. So like if I'm mad at the guy, like this guy's messing up my vibe, then I kind of took the bait, right? I got tricked by the trickster. But if I can like smoothly, gracefully handle that situation, then I'm actually the king, right? And the jester will fall into line. So the wild man, the trickster, the jester, different archetypes. I've also read the grief man is a whole archetype. I don't know a lot about that one. But an excellent book to dive into these is, well, there's two. One is called Iron John, by Robert Bly, Story for Men. It's a fairy tale that gets a good treatment by Robert Bly, the poet, where he reads part of the story and then kind of breaks it down, shows how it applies. Really great. Has the wild man in it. And the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, I can't remember the author's name, but if you Google King, Warrior, Magician, Lover book, you'll find it right away. I have some links, actually, affiliate links that give me 1 cent if you click them and buy the book. So I'll post those in case you're interested. Yeah, so I think that kind of gets the idea across of what these archetypes are. I'm going to do a video on each of the archetypes that kind of goes into them a bit more. But would love to hear questions, comments, how you see these guys show up. Once you're aware of these, you'll start seeing them in movies, plays all over the place. So like the Avengers, right? Iron Man, total magician archetype, right? With a bit of that detached manipulator and trickster vibe, right? Like, but he's also a warrior, right? And you see in his evolution that he, like at first he was playing the magician up front, and then the warrior was in there, right? And they've got this awesome magic suit, and then eventually starts embodying the king, right? Where he's a leader, right? He actually saves the world. So these archetypes are at play in these different characters' journeys, and you can notice them. So I'll stop there. My name's Matt Davis. This is the Kingmaker Project. Let's talk soon. Goodbye.